What is something that you believe in that no one else around you does? If you've heard episode 30 with Ritesh Agarwal, the founder and CEO of OYO Rooms, then you'll recognize this as a question he had to answer while applying for the Thiel Fellowship. It's a simple but powerful question that usually differentiates motivated, passionate, and unreasonable founders from other equally capable professionals. Because what is a startup if not but a mere belief in something that should exist? The question, what is something that you believe in that no one else around you does, is also equally apt for my guest today. Because Soumya Rajan believed in something that no one else around her did. Soumya is the founder and CEO of Waterfield Advisors, India's largest multifamily office and wealth advisory firm, which manages over 40,000 crore rupees. That's over $4 billion for its clients. But in 2010, Soumya was working at Standard Chartered Bank, a bank she joined straight from college after back-to-back mathematics degrees. A bank where she'd worked for 17 straight years. A bank which had been her first and only job. Most importantly, for the last 2 years, she'd been the head of Standard Chartered's private banking arm. She'd reached the very top, but having reached there, was wondering why she wasn't interested in playing the same game anymore. Perhaps it was because 2010 was also the year Soumya turned 40, the age when many professionals hit their midlife crisis. If you remember, Karthik Jayaraman, the co-founder and CEO of Way Cool, decided to start up too after hitting 40. Soumya too decided to quit her job and start out on her own by making a contrarian bet that it was better to charge her wealthy clients directly for financial advice instead of making money via commissions paid by financial services companies whose products she would recommend. Soumya says that in 2010, this went completely against the tide in India's wealth management sector. No one else was doing it. Even her peers and ex-colleagues were dismissive of her belief. In this episode, Soumya, in her calm and reflective manner, tells me her story. There is a strong thread of vision that runs through our entire conversation. Soumya is driven by a sharp sense of curiosity and purpose in everything that Waterfield Advisors is doing. You'll notice it in the way she breaks down her midlife crisis, her role as CEO, her beliefs about products and incentives, and even her work for empowering women as investors. We also talk about what the wealth management landscape of India looks like. Why Waterfield is like a lawyer or doctor but for financial well-being. How to survive in the short term when you're building to last. And the one question she asks people before hiring them. This is episode 32 of First Principles with Soumya Rajan. Let's get started. Thank you, Soumya, for appearing on the show. I want to start with how you started Waterfield. I think from our research, it came up that you had a midlife crisis of sorts. You turned 40 and you knew that you wanted to do something different. What was it? What was that feeling? What was that, was it ennui? Was it something else? Could you take us back to when you turned 40 and you had that midlife crisis?
So yes, Rohin, love to tell you about what prompted the decision to become an entrepreneur. So as you rightly said, I had just turned 40. It was 2010 at that time. And it was just 2 years after the global financial crisis of 2008. And at that time, I was heading the private bank of Standard Chartered. I was quite lucky in my stints in Standard Chartered. I got everything very early in life. So here I was heading a P&L, which was the private bank, by 38, which was 2008. What I found when I was heading the private bank was that I didn't think we were going about it correctly in the way in which we managed our clients. I thought that we were very transaction focused. We were very keen on looking at the investment side of it. But when you spoke to different clients, they wanted more. So you had your relationship managers who would be very happy to have gone and done an investment of 5 crores for a client who was actually worth 500 crores. And they were kind of, doing cartwheels. And I thought, but this isn't right, because the client, one, is worth much more. The client is also looking for much more. And we were not solving that problem in the private bank because we were very investment heavy. The second big problem was that we were in what is called a distribution-led business. The industry was distribution-led. So as a bank, we were making our money from the commissions that we received from the product manufacturers. So as a business head, I am motivated. Product being a mutual fund or a PMS or a PMS, or let's say an
much
alternative.
The same way a bank would operate even for a retail customer.
Correct, even
right?
today. And then I thought, but I as a business head am motivated by the product that gives me the most money. So if there was a product that gave me very little fees, let's say 20 basis points or 30 basis points, what was my motivation to have the relationship manager actually place that product in a client's portfolio, as opposed to someone else who was giving me 5% of fees, and then the relationship manager is then motivated to sell that product or place that product in a portfolio. So somewhere in my mind, that didn't sit right. So just the ethics of it, if there's a better word, I don't know, but the ethics of it, that there was a non-alignment of interests or there was a conflict of interest when I called myself an advisor, but I was actually maybe placing some other product in a client's portfolio, that didn't sit well with me. So a combination of the ethics and the values, a combination of just the market sentiment of post-global financial crisis, and most individuals and clients being quite unhappy with their banks, because the global financial crisis really did come because big banks in the US had one set of products that they had on their proprietary books, and they were selling another bunch of products to their clients. And that led to the crisis. So when I was reading all this, I just kept thinking that, this is going to happen in India. It's going to happen within a couple of years, if not a decade, where we're suddenly going to find that clients are going to be quite unhappy, where they have their wealth managers pushing products to them that don't necessarily meet their needs. So I said, okay, we keep complaining about, let somebody else do it. Let somebody else take the first plunge. And I thought, no, let me take that leap of faith. And at that time, of course, I was also going through this, the questions that you ask at 40, as what is the meaning of your life? What is the relevance of what you're doing? And then I said, well, could I start a company which was a company which did not have any of these conflict of interest issues? Could we be a company that had a holistic wealth management services that we could provide? And then I remember talking to my husband and saying, I'm going to do this because we've always been, a double income family. And what will it mean now if I give up my job? Are you okay for me to do this? And I remember my parents being in utter shock, because if I go back to my own background, we came from a salaried background. My father was with State Bank of India. He'd been in one job all his life. And I had been in Grindlay Standard Chartered for 17 years. I'd never moved after the first job that I took up. So it was quite difficult for the family to accept the fact that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. But I think somewhere deep down inside, my husband knew that I wanted to build something. I wanted to create something. And he never wanted me to have any regrets in my life. And likewise, I didn't want to have any regrets in my life. So that's how Waterfield was born.
Fascinating. So in many ways, you climb to the top of the corporate ladder and then realize that the prize wasn't really what you thought it would be. And then you started about trying to recreate it from scratch.
Yeah.
Great. Um, your family, like all, I think, traditional salary, middle class, like, I come from one as well. And I had versions of the same conversation that, like, are you stupid? Like, why would you give away a job, so many years of experience, right? Because, I mean, and to be fair to them, they cannot process this, right? So, of course, they were in shock. Your husband was supportive. But from what we understand, a lot of your peers were very skeptical that what you would start would fail within a couple of years. And I mean, just as an outsider, I would kind of wonder the same too, that you're really been talking about incentives, that um, banks or financial institutions are incentivized to sell products where they make more money. And this is a truism. I walk into a retail store, the stuff which is kept near the checkout counter is more profitable. If I ask for a brand of biscuits, the brand which is recommended to me is the one which gives the shopkeeper more incentives, right? So incentives drives everyone's behavior. What was it? And I'm assuming that was what your peers were saying, that look, you're going to fail because you're going against the way the incentive system is structured. Were they wrong? And what did you see back then that they weren't seeing?
So that's a great question, Rohin, because rightly, I think what a lot of my peers were seeing, and perhaps a lot of people even today see, is a kind of short termism in the way in which they build their businesses or they look at businesses. Whereas when I looked at Waterfield and I looked at what I was building, this was about the long term, but more importantly, it was about building right, not just for not just for clients, but for the ecosystem. That today, if you have only one business model, which is in a particular way, which is based on a certain set of incentives, but that doesn't land correctly for the client or one of the stakeholders, then that jars in my mind. So for me, it was, could we create a business model that was actually aligned with what is better for the larger ecosystem and stakeholders? So every time I always heard, but Indians don't pay fees, because the business model that I was now embarking upon was to say that I will not get compensated by my product manufacturer, but I will get compensated by my client, because only if the client pays me fees will I then have a true alignment in serving their interests best. So when I looked at my peers were saying Indians don't pay fees because they've always been getting money from the product manufacturer. I was trying to say, well, we haven't really tested this, because I was thinking about lawyers, I was thinking about doctors, and I was thinking that you go to your lawyer and doctor when you need medical help, legal help. By the same token, your financial well being needs to be taken care of also by somebody who has your best interest at heart. So, could Waterfield be positioned as a company that was like a lawyer or a doctor, but it was positioned to look after your financial well being? And that meant being able to be much more holistic in the way in which we looked at either the opportunity or what we were trying to solve for. But clearly, yes, it was quite a fight, which was there against competition. But when I look at now statistics, which is, let's say, a developed market today, wealth advisory is about almost 60% of the way in which clients engage with their wealth managers is through an advisory model. Today, it is still 14 to 15% in India. But if you were to talk to any competitor today, they will all say, we are moving towards the advisory model. I'm happy to note that, Waterfield was a pioneer in this space 10 years ago.
On that note of the difference between long-term and short-term thinking, whenever a new player wants to disrupt a sector which is driven by short-term thinking and incentives, and it says we want to bring in a long-term perspective, it necessitates that for the first few years they will make less money, they might probably not be profitable, they might have to go through a lot of hardships because the entire system is going to work against them, right? You go and talk to a client and the client will be like, you want me to pay you money? How come nobody else? I mean, in many ways, we went through some version of that ourselves. It's like, Indians don't pay for news. I mean, that's not true. I mean, or Indians want everything subsidized by advertising. As we see today through the rise of subscription-driven OTT channels or news platforms, that's not true. Like you rightly said, somebody's got to do it to see whether it works or not. Yeah. But when you did it for the first few years, you were a single person starting out. I mean, did you have co-founders? How did you fund yourself? I mean, it's great to have the philosophy of wanting to build a long-term business model, but how would you do it in the medium to short term? Because you're going against the grain and you don't have the capital and the infrastructure of the system.
So one thing I will say, Rohin, is I think I was quite the idealist at that time, because for me it's about, can you build something better for the greater good? Was always an inherent kind of philosophy. Maybe a lot of that I would in some ways ascribe to just good family values, which have been ingrained over the years. But what could you do for the greater good? But the practical issues of, how do you fund yourself and how do you make ends meet? I think one was, I do have a co-founder. So the person who I chose to be a co-founder with me at Waterfield was someone who was in the search business. Because in my...
Sorry, what does that mean?
Executive search. So
very interesting. The marriage of wealth management and executive search.
Yeah. And the reason behind that was because in my mind, when you built a business or you're starting something new, the core of it is people. So if you don't have good people, then how are you going to build a company? Today, I'm very proud that the first employee of Waterfield still is an employee of Waterfield after all these years. But to me, that was like the perfect co-founder that I could have, somebody who knew people in the ecosystem, because my ecosystem at that point was very narrow. It was just Standard Chartered and everything in and around Standard Chartered. And I realized only after I left Standard Chartered how big the opportunity and how big the world really is. Because when you tend to be in an organization, you get very fixated on your ecosystem of the organization. And you don't really think beyond. So for me, it was like this, oh my goodness, what a wealth of opportunity there is outside. And I felt even, we can talk about this later, that I actually grew as a person after I became an entrepreneur. But having said that, for the first couple of years, I was very hesitant to raise any kind of external capital. I was very clear that I wanted to make sure that this business model did actually work. And when I first started Waterfield, we didn't even have regulation that supported us. So company is founded in August 2011. The first time we have any kind of regulation that's even supportive is when SEBI had this direct and distribution plans that came out in September of 2012. So for those first 5-6 months, I was knocking on various people's doors and they were telling me, look, why should we pay double fees? Because they're paying distribution fees and on top of it, they'll pay advisory fees. And I was really thinking, gosh, this is not going anywhere. And I will say that I was ready at that point, a year on, to say, let's just shut this business. It's not working. It's too early for this idea.
How many people were you at that point?
About 3 or 4, not more than that. And then I was thinking, this is clearly not working. And then SEBI happened and I said, okay, this is a chance. It means that I can work with clients to say, I will do your mutual fund distributions, your mutual fund allocations through the direct plan and not the distribution plan. And I can help you save some money. Because there is no, it's a little bit more technical, but you have an expense ratio, which is there in distributor versus direct plans, and direct plans are cheaper, which means that you could have some advisory fees, which is also there, and the client is still better off going through that route. And I said, all right, this is an opportunity. The good part was within 3 months of that, January of 2013, SEBI came out with another set of guidelines, which was the Registered Investment Advisor Guidelines, which then suddenly meant that we have a business. We have an opportunity to really build a business in advisory.
I could ask you why those guidelines were so good for you?
It was very good because the other thing I realized when I was reaching out to people in that 1 year was that if you're not regulated in financial services, there is always this hesitancy of giving money to someone or getting somebody to advise them, because they think that you can up and leave tomorrow, and then what happens to their money, which is extremely valid.
And especially if you don't have the brand of a large bank backing you.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, in fact, that is a learning for me in some ways, which was that was quite a shock, because when you have a visiting card that says that you are the head of the private bank, everyone's ready to talk to you. And then the moment you don't have that, and you're just you yourself waiting to even have an appointment or a meeting with somebody, the doors close. And it takes a long time to rebuild. But that was more learning.
Could you tell us about Waterfield Advisors? How would you describe the firm? What is it and what does it do?
So Waterfield is a group of professional managers who will work with you as a client or a family in all your investment and non-investment related requirements. So if you have some money which you've got as a corpus, you want to make it, you either want to save that money and you want to grow it, then we help you in terms of identifying the best products which are out there, which will help you for the outcome that you want in your portfolio. And different people have different outcomes. Some people may be wanting to invest that money for their business. Some may be wanting to invest that money because for their retirement, someone else for their children's education. We try to understand what is the purpose behind which you want to invest and help you there. The non-investment part is really the part which a lot of private banks were not addressing, which is around succession. You have a family business. How do you then make sure that that family business is passed on to the next generation in a good way? How do you make sure that you prevent conflicts from arising when that business gets passed down? How do you make sure that you have a will in place in terms of your own legacy? So we were trying to look at wealth management from the broader perspective of all the other things that wealth managers do, which is around succession, around legacy, around family governance, around philanthropy. Unfortunately, in India, wealth management is equal to investment management.
I was just about to ask you that, because the way you described it, it looks like the first line of business for you is like investment advisory for retail investors, but at a higher order level for families and high net worth individuals, right? So it's the same thing, because
Yes.
even an investment advisor does pretty much the same thing. What are your needs? When would you want money? We'll recommend. And that's what you do, but at a much larger scale.
Yes.
The second part, what you said, is largely absent from the retail investor space, and for probably maturity reasons.
Correct. And I think that's what a client actually wants. They want
Wants enough to pay for it?
I think they will want enough to pay for it, because by having an advisor on your side, you prevent the accidents from happening. What are we promising? We are promising to at least try and help prevent the accidents. or making sure that something terrible doesn't happen. Could we, are we, so when you look at investments as well, it's not always about investment return maximization. It's about return optimization for your level of risk or whatever are the outcomes that you want. Having an advisor tell you that, I think, is extremely important, because otherwise you may get carried away with the noise. We're like, I don't want to say that we're the cold water, which is, kind of dousing all the exuberance, but we are the realist in the room to tell you what can go right, but what can also go wrong.
So the way you make money is largely through fees that you charge from clients?
Is only through fees.
Is only through fees. You did mention that you do invest and you have a fund of funds business as well.
That is
Where
correct.
does that come in? Is that part of the first, like you're investing your
Yes.
clients' money on behalf of them?
Yes. So when you have two models, you would have an advisory model, which is where we provide advice to a client. So we know their entire portfolio. We then decide how much is going to go into equities, how much will go into fixed income, how much will go into gold, how much will go into gold, international allocations. But there are times when the client does not have the time to be able to actually manage their investments, in which case we say we will operate these investments through a discretionary wrapper. So it is still multi-asset class, but you've given us the discretion to say, here is the 100 rupees, please go and manage it on my behalf. The fund of funds specifically was an initiative that we started in 2020. And that was a fallout from the advisory business, because what happened in advisory is that, let's say that I was investing into different private equity and venture funds. What I found is that we were doing the diligence, we have all the data, we spend a lot of time with the fund managers to understand what is it that they're doing. And then we recommend to a client and say, please put money into this private equity or this venture fund. But we found that in the process, we were not necessarily getting institutional rights for the investments that we made. And by institutional rights, I mean that we weren't always getting co-investment opportunities on the fund because the ticket sizes were too small individually, but collectively would serve the threshold that the funds had. We weren't necessarily getting pro rata. We weren't getting a seat on the LP Advisory Council. And we may or may not get better fee terms. That may or may not happen. But we found that when we aggregated the capital and we created a fund structure where we aggregated family office capital, we were then one single check into the fund. So the funds loved that because we were then aggregating this capital. We were then in a position to give one check. They then saw us as an institution of domestic capital and said, well, we're very happy to provide the institutional rights for you in terms of a seat on the LPAC, pro rata rights, co-investment rights, and so forth. That worked very well for us because it meant that we could then be much more integrated into the ecosystem, and we would play to our strengths. Our strengths was the diligence that we did on the fund. I think the one thing to note, Rohin, here is that the way in which a distributor business runs is that if you're a wealth distributor and you give money to a fund, then the fund manager is paying the wealth distributor for distributing the fund. Whereas in our case, we were choosing the fund for who they really were in terms of their performance, in terms of their team, in terms of the exits, in terms of just their caliber. So it then meant that for the funds themselves, they found a partner who was completely in alignment with them. They didn't have to destroy their economics just in order to get much more capital by going through the wealth distributor route. So it really worked well.
I mean, you've said you work largely with high net worth individuals and families. If I may ask, what's a broad ticket size when, that kind of buys you entry to be advised by Waterfield Advisors?
So we have different segments at Waterfield. When we first started, It was really trying to cater to the client that had more than 30 million in terms of financial assets. We then dropped that maybe around 3 years after I started the business, 4 years after I started the business, to 10 million, because we then found that we needed to also be part of the journey for the families as they were creating wealth. So one of the things we spoke about earlier, which was on the non-investment side of it, a big part of it is around your investment vehicles, is around, have you got the right structures? Have you got the right trust structures in place? Is that, and sometimes you need to do that before the liquidity event. So we found that we needed to start working with our clients from the 10 million threshold itself in order for us to help them through the liquidity event. But then more recently, I've been asked, well, you do all this good stuff for the very rich. What about democratizing that a little bit more? And that's when about 18 months ago, we started working with clients who were typically corporate professionals. So if they were lawyers, if they were doctors, if they were private equity partners, if they were management consultants, we realized that they were very time poor. They wanted all this, but they didn't have the time. But they also wanted to work with a company that had their interest at heart.
So these would be what, $3 to $5 million?
These would typically start now at about 2 million. I would say now it's about that 2 to 10 million segment is where we're currently operating. The one exception, though, that I've made even to this 2 million threshold is where women are concerned. On International Women's Day, we launched a segment called Heritage. The HER is the her in heritage. Because I believe that when we were working with women professionals, with women entrepreneurs, and with women inheritors, they needed something a little different. Money didn't always come to them in the 2 million or 3 million at that level so quickly, but they needed I don't know if this is the right word, a safe harbor, a safe place where they could ask questions, where they wouldn't feel judged.
But, I mean, this is true. I mean, virtually every research that has come out about women and investment comes to the fact that I think they're always looking for, places where they can be treated as professionals, as people, and not have a default point of view thrust upon them and have someone who talks to them.
And I think Waterfield does that. We are 50% of our staff are women. 33% of my senior leadership team are women. And we engage with women in a different way, because through Heritage, I've realized that these women who we're catering to are already financially independent. So we're not solving the independence problem. Someone else is doing that. We're solving a financial literacy problem, because they may be financially independent, but they don't know how to manage their money, or they don't know who to ask if they want to plan for a particular life event that may be happening. So in Heritage, we look at three things. We look at financial literacy. We look at networking, because for women, networks are very important. And networks outside what they may see through their family structures or their spouses or otherwise, or even their work ecosystems. It's nice to have a network outside of that. And the third is wealth with a purpose. Because ultimately, I believe women tend to be, when they're looking at their wealth management, tend to be quite goal-oriented. They know why they are saving that money. It, as I said, it could be for retirement, it could be for their children's education, it could be to start a foundation, it could be for starting a business later. But they're thinking about, well, I have this pot right now. What do I do so that I and here I will use the word maximize, because I think it's about how do I maximize this, because they know that that wealth is going to be used for good in something that will help them and their families going forward.
You said women tend to be slightly more goal-oriented.
Yes.
I would ask you to contrast that with men, as opposed to men who are...
I think goal-oriented in terms of their money. They're very clear that I would like my money to be this. I would like it to be used for this. And we then work backwards with them to say that let us look at the options in terms of the portfolio to get you to that goal. And the difference between men and women in investing is that, let's say I share with a woman client that this is good for you to get to your goal, but this is a much riskier product. It will get to your goal, but the woman will ask a lot of questions on the risk side to be satisfied that it is appropriate for her to take that risk, to make that investment. Whereas with some of the male investors that we work with, they may be looking much more at the risk, and they're more accepting of the risk, may not ask as many questions as a woman would before making that investment. That's what I've seen. They just want to research and be sure a lot more as women before they jump into making an investment, because they're oriented to, is that in line with what is the outcome that I ultimately want?
That's interesting. From what you're saying, they're more purpose driven and purpose backwards. That I'm laser sharp about what the ultimate purpose is.
Yes.
And will this deviate me from my purpose or not? And you're saying, and of course we're generalizing a little bit.
It is.
Men are more in terms of, I'm trying to maximize my wealth. If this is risky, it's okay, because I think they're slightly more hazier on the purpose, because it's okay.
Yeah.
One is focused more on the, again, I'm generalizing, journey, whereas the other person is slightly more focused on the destination and the purpose.
And we've seen it's I said, yes, you rightly said,
we are hugely generalizing.
And I don't think we should either. But this is just that their wealth needs to have a meaning. It needs to have a meaning.
You said earlier, and of course you're right, that women become financially independent, but they are not financially literate. Now, in any series of events, those two words would never be juxtaposed like that. You would never become independent without being literate in that area. And yet you said that women become independent financially, but they're often still not literate.
Yes.
Of course we know, but I would still like to understand from you, why is that? And how can we hope to reverse that so that literacy precedes independence as much as possible?
And that is really the reason of heritage. Because what I've seen is that women, when they're financially independent, they also multitask on a number of different things in their lives. So they're looking after their kids, they've got their jobs, they've got, they've got elderly parents who they may be also looking after. So at any point in time, there are multiple priorities. So for some reason, the investment part is something that they tend to delegate to a spouse, to a father, to a brother, to someone else, because they've got so many other things to do and they're multitasking all the time that, well, this is one less thing for them to worry about. So it's the easiest to just give away to someone else, to say, you take care of the investing and just do everything else. For us,
the source of many future issues and troubles later on, once they cross that financial independence path and they realize that, look, I wish I had done this better earlier on.
And I think, and there's also good reason to do it, because women tend to outlive men. So we see women coming into wealth sometimes very late, because their spouse has passed away, they've inherited all this money, and they just don't have a clue as to how to go about looking after it. And at that time, it may be too late to try and learn new things. Of course, many women, then have no choice but to confront it and learn. But I would rather that they learn earlier. Let them learn. They may not choose to be the active investor. They may still say, let me delegate this out to somebody else. But don't relegate the decision, delegate it. I think there's a slight difference here. One is where you are consciously asking someone else to do it. In the other case, you have not, you have deprioritized it. So I think that's very relevant.
A couple of questions about Waterfield. What can you tell us in terms of its size? I mean, how many employees are there at Waterfield today?
So we have about 120. In the last 1 year, we've kind of doubled our staff. We raised a round of capital in January 22. So that helped us to really accelerate and build and grow and scale our business to be much larger, and also in some ways to start working in this new segment.
How large is your business? What do you look at? Assets under management?
We look at assets under management. That's really the driver for us. We manage close to about 40,000 crores right now, and that 40,000 crores is across financial assets. So we don't include a lot of other things that other wealth management companies may look at. But for us, it's just what we manage, which is the financial assets. When I look at Waterfield and when I look at the opportunity, I just think that I want to be able to kind of spread the good stuff that we do in many ways. And can we help more families? Can we help more clients? Can we help more corporate professionals? Can we help more women? Just to not be afraid of money and to have a good relationship with money. And I think that's
a
what...
revealing phrase, right?
Yeah.
Afraid of money. I mean,
Yeah.
normally one would never think that you would be afraid of money or wealth.
Yes.
And yet you said that.
Yes. And
why? I mean, could you explain what does that mean, being afraid of money?
I think for women, the context is that, will I make a bad investment, right? For people who are very wealthy, with wealth also comes problems, right? So it's
Will
about...
I blow it up? Will I not preserve it?
Will I not preserve it? Will I blow it up? Will I not be able to pass it down correctly? If I give it to my children too early, will they blow it up? I mean, these are all the things. Will it, and could money lead to conflict within the family because one side of the family has more money, the other side has less? I mean, the money can cut both ways. And here I think we want to try and make sure that people have a healthy relationship with money going forward.
You said you have raised venture money, but not from venture capitalists. How much money have you raised and who did you raise it from and why is it not from venture capitalists?
Great question. So when I did my first round of capital raising, this was about 4 years after 3 years after the company had started. And we raised it first from a family office. This was the Patni family, Amit and Arihant Patni, who actually kind of approached us because they saw what we were building in the wealth management space. And they had just had a liquidity event which had happened in 2011. And they realized that what we were trying to build was exactly what families needed. People who did not have a conflict of interest when they were advising families, people who looked at a more holistic view on wealth management, helping families as they transitioned out of their core business into something else. In fact, that's one of the big things that we see in Waterfield, that when you have a liquidity event, the core identity, and you exit a business, the identity of the family is then lost because they're so closely affiliated with the company that they have to rebuild a new identity for themselves. Much like entrepreneurship, actually, when you start afresh. So they came in 2014, and that was a relationship. Even today, Amit and Arihant continue on our board. And I found that what family offices brought was patient capital, because
so it's the same thing in the other direction.
It's long-term thinking the other way. And I thought, well, this is good because a wealth management business is going to take time to build, particularly if I'm trying to pioneer a new business model. It's going to take even longer. And here was somebody who was willing to look at supporting the journey of Waterfield, and really the values were the same. So that was the first round that happened. The second round that happened was in December 2019. And I said, well, really like the family offices. They understand what we're doing. And I said, well, let's raise a bit more capital. Let's raise it from more family offices. We did that again. And then, so the first round we raised was about, if I remember correctly, about 2 million when we raised the first time. The second time that we raised another 30 crores, which was primary capital. And the last round that I did in January was another 40 crores. So Waterfield, in terms of the funding that we've had, has actually been very reasonably capital efficient. We've built this in about 10 million over the last 12 years. And it's a great business. It just, you can sleep well at night, and it's...
But you still didn't answer my question of why did you not raise it from venture capitalists?
Ah, yes. So it's interesting. In December 2019, when we raised capital, there were a few private equity and venture funds that were kind of interested in what we were doing. But I kept speaking to them and I saying, look, I think we're quite early for you. And we're also, we're not raising large amounts of capital. But they liked what we were building. So at that time, there were 4 venture and private equity funds that actually funded Waterfield from their GP arms. Because I said, look, I'm not going to be able to give you an exit in a hurry. And if you do ask for the exit, then I don't want to destroy the nice relationship we have with each other. So they supported us, and there were 4 of them. There was TVS Capital, there was Zephyr, there was Gaja and Chirate. And they all invested into Waterfield through their GP arms, which is really the vehicle through which they make their sponsor commitment to their funds. So I was very grateful for that support because I think they've all always known that we wanted to build something different. It's going to take longer, but it was also trying to do the right thing. So very grateful for that support. So we did take money from them, but not through their fund, but from their GP arms.
Thank you, Soumya. You hold a bachelor's degree in mathematics from St. Stephen's and a master's in mathematics from Oxford. I mean, I have 2 questions, right? Like, a double degree in mathematics, was that conscious? Was that part of, again, a lot of us are from a generation where a lot of our career choices, or at least education choices, were defined by families, right? And after mathematics, how do you end up in banking?
So I love maths. I mean, just as a subject, all my life, just absolutely love the subject. When I finished school, there was a lot of my class was going into engineering. And, the choice was, do you become an engineer? And yes, I will say, Rohin, very conditioned, given a family background that, one, you study hard. We had the opportunity of going to the best schools. I keep saying we because I'm one of a twin, Rohin.
Yes, you have a twin
I have a twin sister. So it was always about, my parents put us into the best schools, even on limited resources that they had, because they believed that education was the most important thing that they could give us. I think when they do that, there is an automatic kind of responsibility that you feel, at least maybe I felt, my sister felt, that we needed to study hard and do well in order to make our way in this world. Stephens happened because I remember writing the IIT exams, not getting through, and then saying, well, what do I do next? And loved mathematics. So it was like, okay, I will do a degree in maths because I love the subject. Stephens happened. My sister and I both went to Stephens. She did economics, I did mathematics. And then after that, somewhere at the back of my mother's mind, she was very keen that my sister and I go to England and go to Oxford and Cambridge.
This is one of the questions that one of our subscribers had asked. And I think a lot of people who want to be entrepreneurs one day, founders one day, wonder, how did you find your first 10 colleagues?
this is where I think the co-founder helped, the fact that he was in search. So the initial employees were all really people who my co-founder knew and identified as people who could be part of Waterfield. And that's how we kind of started the company. And that was the early stages.
Today, when you're looking, and I'm sure one of the things all founders do are they always have their radar on to spot talented people who could join them as colleagues. What are some of your radar signatures? Where and how are you looking for talented people? How do you find talented people who could join you?
Great question. I think talent is really what makes the wealth management industry in some ways really tick. But I always look out for certainly people who will kind of put their hand up for assignments or more challenging roles. And you can see that spark, which is there when someone who's not quite ready but is willing to make that effort to put up their hand, in some ways kind of moving out of their comfort zone, those straight away tell me that there is a curiosity in this person. And that's something that I do look for, that there is a curiosity to understand a little bit more, to be able to challenge themselves. So that's definitely a trait I look for. The other trait I look for is really around authenticity and genuineness. I think over the years I've met so many different kinds of people that it's quite easy for me to try and to distinguish between the ones who are in some ways have a big talk, as opposed to those who are a little bit more have a serious intent. So genuineness for me is another big thing that I look for, which really comes out in the communication. So for me, perhaps what I look out for is how are these youngsters or talent or otherwise communicating their authenticity, their genuineness, and of course, are they ready to move a little bit out of their comfort zone? Because our business is a new kind of business. So even if you come from the industry, you have to be ready to move out of distribution, because where is our talent coming from? It's still the distribution industry. We have to be able to find people who are ready to take that leap of faith, to come out of distribution, to look at a new business model. So they've got to feel comfortable doing something that they've not done before. So these are the traits that I would really look for.
What kind of people or what kind of skills or talent does it take to make it in wealth management?
I think you need to be a really good listener. You need to be able to listen first before you prescribe anything, because ultimately you are an advisor, you are a sounding board. You can't give advice unless you've understood what the problem is. And that means really good listening skills. So I think one big attribute will be listening. The other is to be a good problem solver, because ultimately in the business of wealth management, particularly advisory, we are looking at solutions. We're not looking at products, right? So you need to be able to orient yourself towards giving good solutions to someone. So I think that's the other thing that I would look at. These are the two.
Still sticking with people and talent, do you have any favorite open-ended questions that you tend to ask people during an interview or a first conversation?
I always ask them what are their career aspirations, because I find that when people tend to hire, we tend to hire sometimes for the immediate role, whereas it's very important to understand what is the aspiration of that person longer term, because you may bring them into your company now, but if longer term you've not understood what their aspiration is, you may lose them within a few years. So for me, I find by asking them that question, I get a very good sense of who they want to be, who they are, where they want to get to, which may get missed out when you're asking for the immediate role that you're hiring? This is one of my favorite questions to ask.
From the time that you've started Waterfield Advisors to today, have you seen an evolution in the answers that you're getting to this question the last, 10, 12 years? What are your career aspirations?
I actually find most people get stumped at that question. They've never thought that far, or they've not.
Isn't it ironic
It
that
is.
like professionals not having thought through? I mean, if you're in an interview,
Yeah.
one would assume that the first thing that you would
Yeah.
have clarity on
Yes.
is what are my career
Aspirations, and it's not there. So I actually sometimes then try to help them out, saying that where would you like to be? What kind of roles would you like to do? And you try to just make it a little easier for them to try and get their head round. But that's something that surprised me. I will say that, Rohin.
Has Waterfield Advisors ever had any near-death experiences? I'm assuming the one that you spoke of when you started and about a year in.
that was near death. After that, we've always just continued to plod along, because and I think that's another very important trait as an entrepreneur, is just determination, resolve, belief. You just know that you're going to make it. It's you're going to, whatever are the ups and downs. I think that mental strength is extremely important, certainly for founders, to be able to go through whatever are the ups and downs that the journey will have. And it's never going to be smooth sailing. I think that's one thing that all of us in this as entrepreneurs will know. But to be able to manage that situation well, to be able to keep your mental and physical strength throughout that period, I think those are critical in any journey.
As CEO, what is it that you feel you add most value to Waterfield Advisors?
I think the vision. I think that's one. The ability to have that upfront and stated. The other, interestingly, Rohin, I found that even leadership styles have had to evolve. In the early days, it was always about leading from the front.
Rolling up your sleeves, doing whatever it took.
Whatever it took, so that you're kind of there, you're in it, you're with them, you're with the troops, and everyone is out there to garner business. When I think about what it has to be going forward, I think of it more like leading from behind, or basically as a shepherd, because now you have a situation where you've got senior people in the right roles to take the business forward, and your role is more about keeping the flock together so that there are no kind of if somebody's straying, how do you bring them back into the fold? So I've even sensed as an entrepreneur, my own leadership style has had to change from leading from the front to actually now saying, okay, I'm going to lead like a shepherd from behind.
Was that hard? Because that transition sometimes isn't easy for founders who are
hard.
used to being hard charging in the trenches.
Very, very hard. Very hard. Because you always, or maybe it's just me as a personality, you want to be more in control. And I can tell you that for me, I'm a bit of a perfectionist.
I was about to add perfection. You added it yourself.
And that's very hard to be able to say, it doesn't have to be 100% right. It's okay if it's...
Someone else needs to do it 80% for them to discover it.
Exactly.
How to take it to 100%.
Exactly. But that's a mental shift that I've had to make. It's not been easy, but I also realize, and even now, I won't even say that I'm there. I will say that it's a journey for me as an individual to let go a little and to make sure that I can allow the others to develop and let them have the journey that I've had in the past.
How much of a planned person are you when it comes to your week? The week starting out, what percentage of your calendar is already filled up and what percentage is.
Very planned, very planned, in that sense that I have a lot of meetings with clients, and that's really where I spend a lot of my time as well. So their schedules tend to be quite
Sacrosanct.
sacrosanct. So for me, because of that, my schedule is quite planned and programmed. What I do try to do is keep half a day a week without any meetings, because I realize that if I fill the entire week with meetings, I don't have enough thinking time. And for me, having that ability to just go back to what I would call my me time is really important. So, what I've tried to do is half a day a week is with no meetings so that I can just think, whether it's about.
Is it a
the
particular
business.
day?
Not a particular day, not necessarily a particular day. It's normally tends to be midweek because I think.
I ask because I
yeah.
keep Wednesdays free
Yeah,
of meetings for myself.
Exactly. So, I mean, Monday, impossible. Friday, definitely not. You're already thinking about the weekend. So, midweek, it's either a Tuesday or a Wednesday.
And what does that time look like?
So, that time looks like thinking about, there are some clients that I may manage directly. So, if I have to plan for a meeting with them, I like to think about what I'm going to discuss with them. It's about time that I would use to read a report that I haven't been able to read. And of course, these days, there's a deluge of information.
Are you an open tab person? Do you have lots of open tabs in your browser, or do you save them somewhere?
I
to
save
read
it.
them?
I actually save them. So what I do is when I see a good report, I always save it, so that I can read it on a flight, or I can just read it over the weekend, or sometimes I read it during this half a day that I keep aside because it's something interesting that would have piqued my interest. So for me, having that half a day is just to be able to figure out a little bit about what are my priorities, and just gives me that space and time to do that.
What are some of the things that you spend a lot of time on but don't enjoy, but add a lot of value to Waterfield Advisors as CEO? These are things that you do as CEO, even though you not enjoy it, but they're absolutely essential to Waterfield Advisors.
I think, given where we are in the phase of our journey, I spend a lot of time on people, and both internal within the organization and external. External, I love. Internal, it's like, how do you bring everybody up the curve? And because we are still quite a young organization, helping people with their leadership as well, and how they come across, and their own aspirations, and helping them reach that is something that takes up a lot of time. I don't always enjoy it because it means I'm taking out time from being out there and talking to clients more, because that's something that I enjoy. But I also know that if it didn't happen, it's not securing the future of the company. So it's something that you have to do. But it's I sometimes wish, it would be easier for people to just get on with it. But that doesn't happen. We're human beings at the end of the day. Everyone has their own, insecurities, their own, and for us, particularly when we've scaled up our business so quickly in the last 1 year, you have people who've been with you for a long time in Waterfield. You've got the newer group that's come in, integrating both, making sure that the culture is right, that the culture is still preserved to what it is. Those are the things that take up a lot of my time, or have more recently. And I sometimes think that, I should be out there more. And you think that, but I also then tell myself, but this is important.
Thank you for listening to First Principles, the weekly leadership podcast from the Ken. That's right. From this month on, you can expect episodes from First Principles every single Thursday. Meanwhile, and in parallel, the First Principles newsletter is also weekly now. We're hitting new records each week for community participation, with subscribers sending in book recommendations, personal habit, favorite songs, and of course, my favorite, Silent Sunday photographs. So, if you're a fan of mental models, leadership, decision making, entrepreneurship, and self reflection, you can rely on us twice each week. Thursdays with the First Principles podcast and Sundays with the First Principles newsletter. You can find links to sign up or submit recommendations in the show notes. Before I go, I have a request. If you like our work, please tell us. Rate or review First Principles wherever you get your podcasts. It's honestly the best judge of a podcast quality and the most reliable way for someone new to find us. This episode was hosted by me, Rohin Dharmakumar, and produced by Anushka Mukherjee. The audio editing is by Rajiv CN, our resident audio engineer. See you next Thursday.